Thank you for that. Now I'm going to go over the agenda for today's meeting. I will begin with an overview of lawn and garden here at CARB, and then move into the Moyer program history with lawn and garden. Then I will spend the bulk of the time going over the proposed chapter updates and conclude with our next steps. Next slide, please. Before we get going, I wanted to ensure everyone had access to the meeting materials to follow along. Just a reminder, live Spanish translation will be available and Spanish slides are available. We'll be putting a link in the chat now. Next slide, please. In 2021, the board approved the small off-road engine regulation, which requires manufacturers to produce zero-emission equipment beginning in 2024 for most solar-powered equipment and 2028 for generators. And to further support the replacement of combustion lawn and garden and the transition to zero-emission lawn and garden equipment, Moyer has dedicated $24.7 million from the fiscal year 2021-22 state reserve allocation to lawn and garden equipment. This is funding that is in addition to the Air District's annual Moyer funding if they applied for the funds. Next, I will talk about the history of Moyer lawn and garden replacements. Next slide, please. The Carl Moyer program has funded the replacement of solar-powered equipment since 2011. Currently, the program is limited to zero-emission residential lawnmowers with a $145 max funding level. Next, I will discuss the proposed chapter updates. Next slide, please. To expand the chapter, we propose the following. Expanding the applicant pool beyond residential equipment owners to include commercial applicants. Expanding the equipment types eligible for funding beyond lawnmowers. Increasing funding amounts to support the transition to zero emission. Enhancing co-funding opportunities. Next slide, please. For applicant eligibility, we propose expanding the applicant pool beyond residential lawn and garden needs. This will require separate eligibility requirements for residential and commercial applicants. For residential applicants, the only requirement is the applicant resides in California. For commercial applicants, we require the following. Businesses must be located within California. They own and operate solar-powered equipment. They provide either a business license or an employer identification number or a personal or a business tax identification number. And I will pause for questions on this topic before we move on to the next topic. Josh, do we have any raised hands?
No raised hands at this time. Oh, one just popped up. Okay, Ron Askelin, please state your name and affiliation, and I will unmute your mic at this time.
Hi, Ron Askelin with the San Diego Sequel Group. Is dealer attestation going to be allowed similar to the other core program?
Not at this point. I know that there's some enhanced flexibility with the core program, but here we're going to need the business license or some tax identification number for a business. But that's a good question, Ron.
Okay, thank you.
No more raised hands at this time.
Thank you. Cynthia, do we have any questions in the chat?
We actually do, from Richard Falcon. He's asking if Visa Challenge landscape companies will be eligible for this program.
This is similar to Ron. So yeah, thank you for this question, Richard. Yeah, there's going to be enhanced flexibility for the core program, but for this program, we are going to need some tax information or a business license. Okay, looks like that's all the questions on this topic. Next slide, please. For equipment eligibility, all horsepower lawn and garden equipment will be eligible for replacement. Also, diesel and gasoline lawn and garden equipment are eligible for replacement. But I want to note, replacements must serve the same purpose as the original equipment. In other words, an existing solar-powered lawnmower must be replaced with a new zero-emission lawnmower. Also, the replacements must be new, cordless, and zero-emission. So in addition to lawnmowers, we are proposing adding the following lawn and garden equipment categories: chainsaws, trimmers, edgers, and brush cutters, leaf blowers or vacuums, walk-behind mowers, and then ride-on or stand and sit mowers. I will pause again for questions on this topic. Josh, do we have any raised hands?
No raised hands at the moment.
And
And so-
nothing in the Q&A at the moment.
Thank you. Just give it a second for someone to come up with a question, and we'll move on. Okay, next slide, please. For the maximum funding amounts, the proposed revised maximum funding amounts for both residential and commercial applicants are included on this table. I want to note two things immediately. The first is these are maximum funding amounts. The second is an eligible purchase includes lawn and garden equipment, batteries, and a charger. To expand, if you are a resident and buy a chainsaw plus a battery and a charger, and it costs $200, your incentive will be capped at $200. If the combined unit costs more than $300, it will be capped at $300, the maximum funding amount. Essentially, the overall Moyer incentive cannot exceed the cost of the items purchased. Now, again, pause here for questions on this specific topic. Josh, do we have any raised hands?
No hands at the moment.
Cynthia, anything in the Q&A?
We have one in the Q&A from Levy B. Can the 2-year requirement be dropped?
That is, that's a good comment. I know, because essentially, that could be prohibitive to a new business that, is into the market. And we definitely don't want to be prohibitive to a zero emission equipment if it does serve the purpose that, an applicant would need. So we'll definitely have to think about that as a management about removing that requirement or having some modification of that requirement. But that's a good question. Thank you for that, Levy.
A part of that question was also, can corded equipment be included in the eligible equipment?
Corded equipment cannot be included. Some local air districts might still allow corded equipment, but what we want to focus on is, is not tied to the actual plug. So essentially, for a commercial applicant, they can't use someone else's plug to plug in their equipment. So it's a little bit unfeasible. And also this ties to the actual the equipment that actually is serviceable by these companies. But that is a good comment.
And finally, is there a limit to battery and charging cable cost?
So, and that's a good question. Thank you as well. So, if you chose to get, looking at this table, if you chose to get a leaf blower, if you're a commercial applicant and you chose to get a leaf blower by itself, the tool by itself that costs $2,000, you can do that. It's just your funding amount would be limited to that $1,400.
Okay, we have two more questions that came in. One is from Don Kitamura, and I apologize if I misspoke your name, but the question is, some commercial mowers can cost up to $35,000. Why is the cap so low?
This is a good question. So for Moyer, we are bound by cost effectiveness limits. And essentially that's tied to how much emission reductions actually come from these pieces of equipment. So although we'd like to offer more, we're bound statutorily to the limit that we can pay per ton of emissions produced or, removed, essentially. But that's a good question though, Don. Well, one thing I want to add on to that too, as well, is I will be talking in the next slide or two about enhanced co-funding opportunities with other programs that we have made additions to this chapter for. So it would help applicants and our residents, get that riding lawnmower at less out-of-pocket expenses.
We have one more in the Q&A from Victor Briones. Is there a maximum amount of batteries and chargers that can be included as eligible purchases?
That's a good question, Victor. So I think probably best to handle this as another example. I'll just use the leaf blowers. Let's say, because they range in prices, and especially for the robustness of the equipment. So if you get a leaf blower that only costs $200 for the tool, then you would have, $1,200 left to spend on as many batteries and or chargers that you could, buy under that $1,400 total, if that helps out. So yeah, there's not a limit to how much batteries and charger you can get. The limit is the maximum funding amount.
And that's all for the Q&A for now.
And Derek, we've had a couple hands raised in the meantime. So Ron Askelin, I'm going to allow you to unmute your mic again.
Yeah, this is Larry Emerson. You unmuted mine. Am I next?
How you doing, Larry?
Oh, apologies,
Hi.
Larry. It says on my end that it's Ron's mic that I unmuted.
He sent me the link, and I'm using his link. So
yeah.
Okay.
So this is Larry Emerson. I'm also with San Diego Sequel, and I'm sorry I came in a little bit late. So I see there's residential, commercial. Your example you just gave was for commercial, where you could buy a leaf blower and several batteries. Stay underneath this 1,400, and you can get a charger as long as it stays under 1,400. So for the residential, if I get a leaf blower, like one time I bought one with a 5 kilowatt-hour battery, it was $240. So that wouldn't allow me to buy an extra battery. Is that correct? With the $200 is the max?
Yeah, unfortunately, in that situation, yeah, you would your maximum funding amount would be used for the tool. That $200 would go towards the tool, and then but you would if you happen to find because it sounded like that might have been like a bundle. So hopefully that leaf blower did come with a battery, so you could
Yes,
actually
it
use
came with
it.
the battery.
But yeah, unfortunately, yeah, for that. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Larry.
So then just in a residential case, if you wanted to get an extra battery, because it came with a battery, you would just have to pay the difference. The 200 is the cap.
Yes, in
For
that
residential.
situation, yeah. The maximum funding amount would be 200, and
Okay.
for that resident,
Yeah, thanks. I came in a little bit late, so that's your examples help clarify everything. And anybody else go next.
No, thank you for the comment, Larry, and please let us know if you have any questions as we go along, and we'll stop at the end for questions on everything as well.
And we do have one other hand up, and that is Peter Anderson. I'm going to allow you to unmute your mic. Please state your name and affiliation. Peter, you are still muted. You should be able to unmute at this point.
There we go.
Yes, and can you see me as well?
We have disabled the audience video, so I do apologize for that.
This is Dr. Peter Anderson with Sierra Club San Diego. And I have two questions, but first of all, let me commend you for what I think is a fabulous program. We work so hard to reduce greenhouse gas and air pollution. And this is an extremely cost-effective way to do this. So Sierra Club is extremely supportive of this program and urges you to expand it. Now, here's my two questions. First of all, they're both on the logistics of having an individual, let's say a landscaper with one truck. And I happen to know a couple of these guys. When they go to a commercial outlet, the commercial outlet does not know anything about this program. So that's my first question. The second thing is, how do these individuals apply for these grants? Must they be in writing? And the corollary of that is, can a better English speaker work with them on applying to the grant? So these are just logistic questions on how this would work.
Okay, no, these are some good questions. So if I got these right, and just remind me if I missed one or two, okay, please, Peter.
Sure.
So for the commercial outlet, this is where we struggle with all our incentive programs, or at least I might, I'll admit to that, because, before, no one really knows where I work, right? They don't know I work at CARB. They don't know what I do. So that's a problem that CARB has systemically, that we need to get, folks knowing what we're doing here and improve the air. So we actually do have admin funds that when we actually give funds to air districts, they do have a portion to use for outreach efforts, and we hope that they are successful in those efforts. But if you of course have any ways to help out, I'm pretty sure San Diego would like to hear that, especially talking to Ron, and Larry from San Diego Sequel. They could probably help you out on contacting the air district, and they'll probably let you know how receptive they are to a suggestion as well. So I think that's fair, and I also too want to go back and say thank you for the compliment on our program. I'll stop and not compliment you on your program either, but how to apply to these funds essentially. So these are air district land programs. So CARB, we implement the program. We administer the program, but we actually asked the air district to implement it. So from San Diego, someone would actually have to reach out to the San Diego Air Pollution Control District and apply to their Moyer program. Because essentially, and then, it might be a written application, it might be an online application. I believe San Diego's an online application. But yeah, they would apply to San Diego to receive these funds. Essentially, we gave these funds to San Diego, and now San Diego's, is going to be using these funds. Of course, we try to not have language barriers, especially, California is so diverse. So I know, that hopefully there's some outlets that people can, if there is a language barrier, hopefully there's an outlet at San Diego that they can reach out to. I can't speak to that specifically, but I know, there's resources available when I worked at local air districts, on how to make sure that we can, receive a comment and help those who need help. So definitely language barrier is not a barrier. And, we understand that, it might be an issue with this sector. So we want to focus on that. And that's why we provided Spanish, live Spanish translation tonight, to be aware of that. Now, did
Sure.
I miss a question,
No,
Peter?
Sometimes it's also a literacy barrier.
Yes, yes.
Or a digital divide barrier, because many of these people, my landscaper is a legal American, but he's immigrant from Mexico, and he speaks English as a second language, and he does not have a computer or an iPad or anything for which to apply to this program. So he would need my help, I suppose, in doing that.
Yeah, and you would benefit from his zero-emission equipment at your house, right? So it's an even trade.
I already bought a couple of electric leaf blowers that he now uses, but he has many customers, and I'd like him to trade in his polluting equipment.
Yes.
Thank you.
That you are exactly the person who we want to target as well, because also there's people, on the ground working in these sectors, but also there's the people who hire, these gardeners to service them. So to service their house. So, you're exactly the person we're trying to reach as well, on the two-pronged effort. So thank you for the comment, Peter. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Was there any new questions in the Q&A, Cynthia? Or are we
Yes.
for this topic?
Yes. So, an anonymous attendee would like to know what the difference between residential and commercial equipment is.
What we're going to do is actually allow the applicant to decide what they deem is residential to fit their needs. What we're going to do on the front end is ask for them to provide information to prove that they are a business, and then that will allow them to get the extra funding amount. We're not actually we don't have a prescribed list of equipment that is or is not commercial. We just want to, give the funding that is associated with the commercial usage versus the residential usage. So if a commercial applicant comes in the door, they would not be prohibited from going to Lowe's, for example, which I've heard is typically not commercial grade equipment. But they would be free to, buy this equipment wherever they need it. But that is a good question. Thank you for that.
And then we have one more from Brian Dodds. An example of one trimmer, 2 batteries, and 1 charging cable are capped at $1,400 on page 9-2 of the draft guidelines. However, these trimmers are only eligible for $700. Are there additional incentives for batteries that would increase the incentive from $700 to $1,400?
I'm gonna mass scramble, Brian, and say that there should be a typo in my guidelines, but I'll have to double check that right now. But essentially, the funding amount on the screen would be reflective like what should be in the chapter. So if there's a typo, I do apologize, but on the screen should be the correct value. So if there's an error on that, I appreciate you finding that, and we're going to correct that as soon as possible.
That's all for this topic for now.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. For co-funding. To further support the transition to zero emission, we have streamlined administrative requirements when combining sources of funding. For example, the Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Project, or CORE, recently expanded its program to include professional landscaping equipment. We have streamlined and simplified the administrative requirements when combining Moyer and other sources of funds, such as the core program for lawn and garden projects. This will facilitate the opportunities to fund and districts to prioritize, for example, funding for small businesses. This proposed revision will make it easier to co-fund and may allow small businesses to receive lawn and garden equipment at little or no cost with 100% funding. Now I'll pause here again for questions. Josh, is there any raised hands?
No raised hands at this time.
Thank you. And then Cynthia, we have a question in the Q&A.
Nothing relevant to this topic at this moment.
Thank you. Let's pause here for a second. Okay, next slide, please. All right, we're at the end. Thank you for your patience as we work through these slides and questions. Right now, the Lawn and Garden chapter is open for comments until December 29th. We plan to release the chapter for use in January 2023. I just want to thank you again for your participation today, and also want to thank my colleagues for their hard work in putting this together. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask now or email myself or my manager, Rania Runyon, and we'll be happy to address your comments. And we'll take all comments until the end of the webinar and ask that you email comments if you run out of time tonight.
We have a question in the Q&A from Richard Falcon. He says, I'm not certain I understood the additional funding piece. Could you repeat?
Yes. And just want to clarify for the co-funding, correct? Let's go. Can you go back to what slide is that? 14, co-funding the previous one.
Yep, should be displaying now.
Thank you. So essentially, one of the things that we wanted to do here is ensure that we provided as much flexibility for small businesses to make this transition as possible, transition to zero emission as easy as possible. So in the chapter currently, there's less requirements, and typically where you need to co-fund with another source. Right now, there's some language in the guidelines on essentially like how you would do this, but we are going to be providing additional guidance specifically for the core program on how to stack or co-fund with these funds. But Richard, if I didn't address that question satisfactorily to you, please feel free to reach out. We might have a one-on-one offline to make sure you fully understand the additional funding that we have allowed in this chapter.
We have another question from Matthew Hugh. Can you talk a little about the equipment manufacturer qualifications to participate in the program?
So this is a good question, Matthew. So right now, the only qualification that we have is essentially, if the applicant wanted to, buy a piece of equipment from said manufacturer, it has to have a warranty. I believe it's 1-year warranty. So that's the only requirement that we have for the piece of equipment. For a manufacturer to be, if you're an air district, so if you're an air district, then you can contract with the manufacturer. But again, there's a comment, I forget exactly from who, apologize, but actually asking about us removing the 2-year requirement for manufacturers to be eligible to participate in the program, because that was prohibitive. So that would be the requirement for a manufacturer to be a third party participant within their district if they so choose. But again, I want to reiterate that if an applicant wanted to get, any equipment from any manufacturer, the only thing that it would have to do is have a 1-year warranty. Want to move over. Do we have any raised hands? I'll move back over to raised hands. Then we'll go back to the rest of these questions in the Q&A.
And we do have a raised hand from Brian Dodds. Brian, please state your name and affiliation, and I'm going to give you the power to unmute yourself.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, good evening. This is Brian Dodds with the San Joaquin Valley Air District. Good to see you again, Derek. Hope you're doing well. A couple kind of comments from our perspective and a question or so. Appreciate all the work that goes into updating these guidelines. One of the things that I think we'd like to see is just a much more streamlined path for residential participants. Many of the air districts operate rebate programs that are very successful. They achieve the goals that would be outlined in these guidelines, and they're very successful, and residents really know how to participate in those type of processes. So I'd really like to see CARB move the line on the residential processes to allow for rebates. There is allowance in the guidelines for like event models, which have also been very successful. The rebate model would follow a very similar path and allow residents to easily participate in this program, which I think would be very beneficial to participation across the state. The second comment or question I have is maybe looking for some clarification on how some kind of different entities might be able to participate in the commercial sector. Obviously, we've got school districts who seem interested in moving to electric. We also have ag entities who would maintain their facilities, including their ag resources, maybe orchards, those types of things that currently use gas-powered equipment, may be interested in transitioning to electric equipment. How would either of those entities fall under sort of the definitions that are currently outlined in Chapter 9? Would they be considered commercial operations?
I want to make sure you're done, because those are some good questions. Yeah.
Those are, at this point, those are the questions and comments that I had for you. Appreciate it.
No, yeah, and feel free to have an open dialogue right now. That's how I set this up. So those are some good questions, especially for streamlining for residents. Because essentially, it's going to be difficult for residents going forward. Essentially because we've had these programs for some time, and they are very successful at the district program, and we have looked into potentially doing a rebate model. I know at this time, specifically for this chapter, I'm not sure if we will have enough time to revisit that right now at this latest stage, especially if we want to roll out here in January. But definitely for residents, I think that is like your local program might be something that like this does not replace your local program, for instance, or this might be an option for the person who might not have gone the rebate process or wants to go through the rebate process. But that is something that definitely we can look forward to in the future, as to expanding the availability of these pieces of equipment, especially to residents. And then also too, I want to tie that to the event model, because one thing that I do want to make sure I highlight is we actually do want to make sure that you can run your current district grant model, your district grant program, excuse me, and some of those are an event model. And we even believe that it might be a little bit more coordination that's needed, but you would even still be able to stack with another program in an event model. It'll just be what I like to call like an accelerated voucher. Just everything just happens that day. and they get their new pieces of equipment. I don't see how that would be, especially if it's, properly communicated to, residents. I would see that as being a more viable option of, showing up one place and, getting your lawnmower and dropping off your old one and just walking away. So that is still allowable. But I know like having the resident go buy a piece of equipment and then without applying and then going back and getting the funding. I know at this time we have not been able to put that into the guidelines. But I know but there is room for the event model, but it is something that we can definitely think about in the future. And then the last one, if I make sure I got all your questions, is the clarification on like what actually would be, a commercial versus residential applicant. And what I want to, just make, this is what I use it as, is like non-residential, like, that ag farmer, who might have an orchard, like that's not for their personal consumption, right? Hopefully, right? So like that would definitely be a commercial entity. What we just don't want is someone, who, is they're small, like, less than quarter acre, saying that they're a commercial entity and they have no clients, right? We want to make sure that these funds get to commercial applicants that are going to use these pieces of equipment that need the extra batteries to make sure that they last a full day. And then so I just wanted to just make sure, like, that ag person that that would be, a commercial entity, and the commercial applicant, I think you mentioned like someone just non-residential. So if this person can't produce anything that, ties them to a business, or their business uses any type of lawn and garden equipment, then, it would not be, it would be not lawn and garden. And I want to make the distinction too here, that like I know for other programs, like for professional landscapers, that that definition is very nuanced as to like someone who performs landscaping duties rather than someone who has a lawnmower. We're actually going after that person that has a lawnmower. So if they're a resident that have a lawnmower, great. If they're a commercial entity that has a commercial operation, that's not their house, like let's say an office building. That's a commercial entity that has commercial needs for lawn and garden equipment. And they could need to use that for more than just, the quarter acre of lawn mowing needs.
Gotcha. I'm not sure if you can still hear me, but appreciate the feedback.
No, and thanks for the question. Those were good. Please let me know if you have any more. Josh, do we have any more raised hands?
We do. Ron Asklund has his hand raised, so I'm going to give him permission to unmute himself.
Okay, and this is Larry Emerson again. Ron was sharing his link, so I apologize for the confusion. The last gentleman mentioned schools. And last year, Ron and I were working hard to get the school supply through the Moyer program. And we were able to get one school processing, and I think they benefited from the program last year. The challenge with them was it was right in the holiday season, December, when the things were due, and they were going through COVID nightmares of handling everything. So this program, and the prior person mentioned schools. How do schools fit into this new program? Is it different than what was being used last year, and how is that?
Yeah. Thank you for that comment, Larry. And I think what you might be mentioning is for everyone else is the Community Air Protection Program and Chapter 5, the schools chapter, where we have an eligibility for lawn and garden equipment to be replaced at school specifically. So this would be eligible for schools as well. And this is what we heard comments about, updating that chapter and not updating the Moyer chapter is, we're hitting the sensitive receptors, but also, it's a problem, 2-stroke engines, as you know. So we need to expand the chapter, and especially with the recent, SOAR amendments to the regulation in 2021. It's a necessary move. But yes, so long-winded, but yes, schools are eligible in this chapter because they would be a commercial entity and not a non-residential entity. And so they would be eligible to the commercial, but they would be eligible, because they're not a residential, they'd be open to the commercial funding amounts. But no, thank you for that question, Larry, and please let me know if you have any other questions. These are good. And thank you again for getting that school to do to enter in the CAP program. I know you guys are on the ground doing a lot of work, so I just want to thank you guys again. All right, do we have any more raised hands, Josh? We'll move back to the Q&A if not.
No more raised hands at the moment.
So in the Q&A, we have 2 questions. The first one from Don Kitamura. In the event that there are issues with having availability of equipment for commercial lawn and garden, how does CARB intend to satisfy the potential demand?
Yeah, so currently, I know this is our first lawn and garden meeting, public one, but we've been doing a lot of work for the past year on this, and especially we've been closely tied to the monitoring lab division that actually implemented that regulation for a small off-road equipment. This would be news to us if there was like, models not available. But in the instance that there would not be, this isn't a regulation. This is just an incentive program. Hopefully they put in the order, and then when it arrived, they got it. But yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't speak more to there's no need, there's no in-service date that someone need to worry about or anything. It would just be, eventually when they got the product or not. The other thing too that potentially, to answer this question wholly is, about the length that these funds would be allowed to be purchased. But that's, like a 3-year timeline. Hopefully folks, are here learning about the program, and they get their equipment hopefully soon. But that's a good question though, Don. And please let me know if you have any more.
I'll also say to Don's question that in the chat, we had sent out a link to the core program, and they have a list of manufacturers and product lines that are currently available. So there isn't really a concern about availability of equipment types.
Thank you for that, Tess.
Yeah.
And we have one more question in the Q&A from Ron Askland. Well, I want to say it might be Larry, but I could be wrong. And he asked, how much flexibility does the APCD have in administering the program? For example, could a commercial landscaper just go to their dealer and have the dealer do the voucher application?
So that's a good question, Ron or Larry, just, San Diego sequel, right? That's a good question. So I know, so I can't speak specifically on how San Diego does their application process, but I do know some air districts have the ability for a third party to fill out the information. But it might need to have, and there actually is something like, hey, I'm a third party filling this out for said person. So their information would still need to be, on the application. But yeah, so you'd have to talk specifically to San Diego about how they're going to implement their program, and if they're going to have that flexibility for a third party to, essentially fill out these applications for, anyone that might have language barriers, internet access barriers, what have you. So that's a good question, but unfortunately, I don't have the specific answer. But your local air district should hopefully work with you to ensure that anyone that needs to get some equipment replaced does get replaced.
And that's all for the Q&A.
All right. I will immediately end it just now. Just give it a few minutes for anyone to come up with any additional questions for Lawn and Garden. But I do again just want to thank everyone for their time. I know it's a simple presentation, but we're just hoping that we can update this chapter, get more lawn and garden equipment out there. And for the air districts, we know we're going to try to have this rolled out in early January. And 2023, and hopefully people like it.
We
ahead.
we have a raised hand. Peter Anderson, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Two quick items, and I don't want to keep people from dinner here, so I'll be brief. Can universities apply through this program? I was a professor at San Diego State University. There's a community college, Cuyamaca Community College right nearby. Are they eligible for the program? That's number one. And number two is, while this is a fabulous program, it seems to be maybe a tad underfunded to really make a huge difference in off-road gasoline burning engine reduction. Is there a mechanism by which is there currently? I know you're an administrative agency, but can we somehow appeal to legislature to augment the funding for this program?
So it's a very good question, Peter, and I just want to let you know I'm a Aztec for life, so thank you.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, so we for the schools chapter, I know for the community air protection program, we focused that on K through 12. But essentially, a public university, and I stress that a public university, not a private one that might be religious or sectarian based. A public university, they would be eligible for this program because they're a commercial entity. So that's a very good question. And as to the funding for this program, so I did mention about the state reserve, the fiscal year 2021-2022 for the 24.7 million. That's a lot of money. Just a little bit of background, historically, we've only funded about 2 million in the Moyer program for lawn and garden equipment. For an injection of 24.7 million, this is big news. But I definitely hear your comment. It's not enough. So one thing I do want to just reiterate is this, so that was the state reserve. And also too, in addition to that, we have the annual Moyer appropriation. So annually, it's like, it's fluctuating, but it's increasing over the time because, things are just getting a little bit more expensive. But annually, air districts, like San Diego, will get funds to use in their Moyer program. And they will be eligible to be used in Chapter 9 for lawn and garden equipment. Now, I do want to just let you know that there are other chapters in Moyer. So the local air district does have the authority to tailor their funds and use their resources to benefit their local needs. I know San Diego Sequel's on the line, so they've been great for us, and making sure that the air district understands that lawn and garden is an issue in San Diego. But yeah, if San Diego does if they have the priority to set their fundings to their local needs. How much of that is their annual budget? That's a San Diego question. But there is annual funding to this program, and again, there's no regulation for this. Hopefully there's more funds, and then we can just replace these into the future. But no, that's a good question, Peter. And again, please let me know if you have anything additional.
Thank you.
Okay,
right.
and we have
Go ahead.
We have Brandon Glover. Brandon, you should be able to unmute. Please state your name and affiliation.
Hey, my name is Brandon Glover. I'm with Still Incorporated. Derek, great presentation. I missed part of the first part of it, but I guess the question I had for you is between consumer and professional, how are you differentiating between the two for someone buying equipment? Because you definitely don't want a professional person buying homeowner battery equipment. You want them to buy commercial stuff, so it's going to hold up a long time. I know within the core, they do have a 2-year commercial warranty, and they have some kind of caveats that are tied to it. But I was wondering, and maybe I kind of missed that on part of your presentation, but how are you differentiating the two?
Yeah, Josh, could you go to slide 11, please? I think it's applicant eligibility. Brandon, I think that's a great question, and thank you for having a manufacturer represent, here. So we know that, there's almost, everyone here at the table, right? So essentially, differentiating from the core program, because the core program is focused on, the applicant, which is, the professional landscaper. And then core has its program where, it already has like the list of equipment. Ours is a little bit different. So we're going to focus what we believe is going to be like an easier process instead of us trying to decipher what is commercial and what's not commercial. We're just going to have the applicant, if you're a commercial entity, you can prove that you're a commercial entity, like what's on the screen. If you own and operate the business, the equipment in California, you have a business license, employer identification number, personal or business tax ID, then you'll be eligible to the maximum funding amount. That would be for commercial applicants only. So it's slightly different, but it's nuanced, obviously, for those nuanced benefits. And yeah, right now, so less headache for the air districts as well, because we're running this program, and if this, which we hope is going to be a multi-year, we're going to still be replacing lawn and garden equipment to the future. If we have an equipment list, it's going to need to constantly be updated. So what we're focused on is this, let's split it at the applicant. If you're an applicant, you get extra funding, or excuse me, if you're a commercial applicant, you get extra funding. Residential, you get the residential amount. So hopefully I answered your question. Go ahead.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, I guess the biggest thing is not so much about differentiating between residential and commercial. Well, I'm actually talking the equipment. So like if a commercial, and I guess this would be up to the air district to decide what commercial equipment would be approved. Or is there like a standard?
So yeah, and sorry for not answering that initially. So we're going to be focusing on the applicant, and then we don't want to dictate how they run their business. So I know you represent Still. I've worked with Still in the past, and a lot of people do use Still, but some people might have a different favorite color. So we don't want to limit them to what they want to get, and
Yeah, no, but I understand that. But I guess the question is if I'm a commercial guy and I go in there and say another manufacturer, I don't have any problem with competition, right? But if someone buys a homeowner product that's not going to hold up, they're going to have a bad experience and they end up throwing it away, or they just don't use it, then that doesn't, that negates all the benefits of the battery. Because there's different grades of battery equipment. There's homeowner stuff and there's commercial stuff. And right now within the core program, there's, they have a 2-year commercial warranty that will hopefully weed out a lot of the homeowner stuff, because commercial guys are using this all day long. So if they buy a homeowner item, it's just not going to hold up as long. So I was wondering, I'm assuming maybe the air districts are going to vet what equipment they're going to approve on these programs. But that was maybe my biggest concern is just as even a California citizen here, I just want to make sure that, that the funds are going to be used properly, because, you don't want someone to buy a piece and then, it doesn't work out for them. And so commercial equipment.
Brandon, I think I understand your concern, and it's a valid one, because essentially, we want to make sure like people are loving, like they're going to zero emission and they're not trashing like zero emission like the next day, right? This thing can't cut, this thing can't do anything, right? So I understand your concern 1,000%. And what we want to do is hope that, like we don't want to prohibit someone from buying what they feel like they need. So if that person bought, subpar piece of equipment, then, they're going to rag on subpar piece of equipment. And, so like, not steal, right? So like, I understand what you're getting at, and we have that concern as well, because we want to make sure people, know that zero emission can do the job that it needs to do. It can replace gas. But yeah, we're just gonna be less prescriptive as to what they buy. If that, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for a great presentation. So appreciate it.
No, thank you. And Brandon, if you feel free if you wanted to follow up for my contact information as well.
Sounds good.
Go ahead, Cynthia. You have another question in the Q&A?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. We have a question from, I'm going to try to do this the best I can, Joe Locksterkamp. So if I had a large business, could I buy 200 mowers each with a 15,000 incentive for a total of $3 million?
I'm not doing math, man. Yeah, if that math checks out, man, essentially what I'll say is right now, like there's no limit on if you're, so like how, as we're in chapter 9 guidelines, we do not have a limit as to, how much the commercial entity could buy. Now, again, I want to reiterate, the air districts have, the ability to tailor their program to how they need. So they do have the ability to say, no, you're only going to get $1 million, or $10,000. Not even, a riding lawnmower, because they might feel 2-stroke is what they need to focus on. Not a riding lawnmower, because maybe they see that a push lawnmower might be beneficial more than a riding lawnmower, just as numbers of equipment they're going to replace. But yeah, if that math checks out, then yeah, there's no limit on what you could buy. Go ahead, Tess.
Yes, there's no limit in what you could buy. However, you need to scrap an IC counterpart. So if you have that many, good for us.
Yes. Thank you for that, Tess. Yes.
We have another question from Don Kitamura. Is in the event that the person receiving the grants is not happy with their electric equipment and they haven't destroyed the combustion, what are their options?
Yeah, I don't think this. I'll answer this as much as it Moyer, but essentially like this is but I think this more is like like the return on like a piece of equipment that they don't like, because essentially like if this was in the Moyer program, they have applied to be in the system, and then essentially when you apply, you're given the ability to go purchase what you need. And then, then as soon as you purchase something, then you're going to then the clock starts. And when you need to, submit that baseline piece of equipment to be destroyed. So if this, if this person, happened to, buy a piece of equipment and it's within that eligible window that they need to destroy it, then, feel free to return it if you need to. But yeah, if you were going to be in the Moyer program, essentially when you buy a piece of equipment, the clock starts on when you need to actually submit that to be destroyed. So Don, hopefully.
Hi, this is Rhonda Runyon, manager of the off-road section and part of this group as well. Just to reiterate, sort of in order to be eligible to get the funding, you do need to scrap your old piece of equipment. So that's one of the things that, whether it's via the dealer or there's direct documentation from, let's say, a contracted scrap, that whether it's the grantee via the dealer, there has to be some documentation that the old equipment is scrapped, and then that's what's provided before there's a reimbursement that takes place. Just to be clear. Thank you.
No, thank you for that, Rhonda. I was, I did not lay out the whole process, so forgive me for that.
There's no other questions in the Q&A.
No hands raised at this time.
All right. I think we've answered and gave plenty of space for people to ask any additional questions. Again, the comment period is open till December 29th. Josh, if you could go to the last slide, please. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so again, the comment period is open until December 29th. Feel free to email myself or my manager, Rhonda Runyon, and we will respond to these comments. Again, we're going to try to roll this out for January 2023. We understand that there's other programs out there, so sorry for the delay. Yeah, if there's no more questions, then this concludes the webinar for tonight. Thank you for your attendance.